So here we are. We're going to talk about blogging and Postgres. This is based on a talk that I gave first at PGConf EU when it was in Berlin, I think. And I've given it a couple of times since, and usually been invited to give it or encouraged to give it. And it's well, anyway. So most of you know me already, so I don't need to delve into this. But for someone who watches the recording later, I work on the Postgres team at Microsoft. Prior to that, I came from a Postgres startup called Citus Data, which was acquired by Microsoft. And my background, I started off in developer tools at Sun Microsystems after I got my degree in computer science years and years ago. And these days, you probably run into me either giving a talk at a Postgres conference or I host a monthly podcast. And look, that's out of date. In the lower right has the old name of the podcast. The new name of the podcast is Talking Postgres. And I'm also involved in this virtual event called Posat as well on the talk selection team. So that's my background. And oh, the other relevant thing is, well, I started off as an engineer. In the last over 10 years, I've spent more of my time in product management or product marketing or community outreach for developer communities, which means I care a lot about writing. I often joke that now my programming language is English. And so, and I even took a year off to write a book at some point, which is a really bad book, which did not get published. I call it my trunk novel, and it is literally hidden away in a trunk, and nobody gets to see
I
it.
have not heard about this. It's a fiction book.
It's a fiction book. It's like
Okay.
a whole mystery thriller thing. But, and the idea is there's a lot of successful writers out there who have a trunk novel, like their first novel that was so bad they just hid it away and never shared it with anybody. So that's kind of what I call it. But I really do care about telling stories. And I think that's kind of what motivated me to give this talk in the first place, because there's a lot of stories to be told about Postgres. There's a lot of things you can teach other people about Postgres. Um, so the other thing that motivated me is I feel like I first heard this quote from Peter Eisentraut, who works at EDB, but it's who knows who to attribute the quote to, which is why it doesn't have an attribution. But it's not just open source, it's open engineering. So I decided to kind of do the whole just open thing and share the process and the techniques and the best practices and the tips that I use and that my team will often use when it comes to blogging. Um, there's a whole bunch of dog illustrations in this talk. So that is my chocolate Labrador, and I don't know. I just thought just looking at her makes me smile. So there you go. She's part of the talk. Um, and what I want to cover today is has two parts. The first is what you write. And a little bit, we only touch for a split second on the second part, which is kind of where you send what you write or how you distribute it. But let's focus primarily on what you write. So in marketing terms, that would be the content rather than the distribution. So we'll go there. And with regards to content, there's kind of two things. There's you and your frame of mind, your mindset when you are approaching blogging. And the second is the edit cycle. So after you've got that first draft, then what do you do? What do you look for? Are there best practices or checklists or things you can take advantage of at that point? All right, and you guys can all hear me okay? We're all doing good.
Yep.
All right. And then do you see that pop up on the top of the screen where it says this meeting is being transcribed?
Yep.
Or
No.
no? Okay, perfect. I'll ignore it then. It doesn't matter. Um, all right. So the first tip I have is to write with a specific reader in mind. I think that helps a lot. Otherwise, sometimes you sit there with your hands frozen on the keyboard, or you're not really sure who you're talking to, so you don't know like what angle to take. So if you think of that person, who you want to read your post, who you're trying to help, sometimes that can be really helpful because then instead of writing one to many, you're writing one to one. And just like it's easy to, write a note on a post-it to someone in your family it's easier to write a blog for just one person. So that will often help unblock people, but also it it affects the tone of voice of what you write. So
Hmm.
writing to an individual is much easier than the amorphous masses who you don't understand. Um, the second tip, hang on a second. Let's see what's going on here. All right. Is obviously just you got to pick a good topic. And so there's a lot of inspiration out there. Maybe the good topic is some new feature that you just discovered, or some new capability that you just delivered into the latest version of Postgres. If you're a contributor, um, maybe it's a question that you've had to answer to your internal team 15 times already. Even once that's happened 5 times, sometimes that's a sign that this is a blog post. Everybody is asking this question. I better go answer it. The cool thing is when you write a blog post that answers a frequently asked question, every time the question comes up, you just send that link. And no more effort needed. Maybe you'll have noticed, I know Rob Treat is on this call and he's an admin for the Postgres Slack. Maybe you'll have noticed there's a common question that keeps coming up over and over again there. That could be a signal that maybe there's a good blog post there. Sometimes I'll use Google Trends. This just happens to be the comparison of PostgreSQL versus Postgres. Looking at, I guess, because I gave this talk in Germany first, the country selected there is Germany. But sometimes I will use Google Trends to try to get a sense of like what's popular, what's showing up in search queries a lot. Um, but the topic is obviously huge. Um, the other thing, and this might be the most important thing, is to have empathy for your readers. Because if you really, really care, I've worked with some people before, and honestly, their top priority is to check off whatever they're doing on their list. It's they are their own top priority. It's like, I want to get this done. Good enough for government work. Yeah, yeah, whatever. It's written, I'll publish it. Their top priority is just it's inside themselves. But if you have empathy for your readers and you care about the fact that it's 2 in the morning and they have a question and they're stuck and they're trying to learn something, um, then what you write is going to be different, or at least what you publish is going to be different. Um, People are in a hurry. They're busy. They don't want to wade through War and Peace in order to get to the answer to their question. They're going to want to scan things quickly to get to the part that matters to them. So having empathy for your readers, to me, that's just my North Star. So I think that's probably what the next slide says. Oh, some people will confuse empathy with sympathy. Um, and sympathy is like I just heard from somebody that they had power outage for a week, right? It's like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I don't know. Sympathy's nice, but empathy is more caring. It's like, oh, I feel for you. Oh, that really must have sucked. And you can actually feel their pain. You can feel their discomfort. And when you feel somebody's pain, discomfort, problems, I feel like the kind of work you do will be a little bit different. Um, Okay, so empathy should be the true north, and that means caring about the reader more than you care about yourself. Uh, I used to have this saying back when I worked in product management that a product, I don't remember the saying now, but it was something to the effect of, when a product manager is unclear or ambiguous in what they send out to a team of 100 engineers, you're just think of how much time you're wasting. That ambiguity is causing 100 people to scratch their head and be like, huh? What does that mean? Does it mean this or does it mean that? And so, but if you care about those people, those readers, those recipients more than yourself, you'll take the time to make sure that what you're saying isn't ambiguous, that it is clear. Um, and the other thing too, you know how there's people in your lives who you have a shorthand with? You can say something that's on the surface it's like, what, that doesn't make any sense, but they can read between the lines. They know you so well, they know what you meant. Well, people reading your blog don't have that shorthand with you. They can't read your mind and they don't know what you know. And so sometimes it's also a matter of like stepping back and figuring out, okay, what is it that I know that I didn't point out to people? What basic definition should I explain first so that they will understand what's in this block. Um, The other interesting thing about this blog, by the way, or this talk, is that a lot of these tips, I wrote them with Postgres in mind because that's what I blog about. That's what my team blogs about. We care about Postgres first and foremost. But a lot of this talk applies to other developer communities as well, as you can see. Like when have I mentioned a specific Postgres feature? I haven't. I'm just talking about how to communicate to a technical developer audience. Anyway, I grabbed this text on the right from some Paris review published years and years ago, but you can see these big chunky paragraphs that probably try to communicate 4 or 5 things each, but most people will never read big chunky paragraphs like this. People are in a hurry. So my number one tip after you've taken empathy as your North Star is to just make things really scannable. And so don't do this and instead use bullets. Put bold font prefixes on the bullets. So if you have a list of 7 bullets, what each bullet is about is maybe going to pop at the beginning of the bullet. Short sentences are your friend. Short paragraphs are your friend. White space is your friend. Taking certain things instead of communicating them in sentences, but putting them in nice tabular tables can be super helpful as well. So all these things will make your blog posts more scannable. Um, the second thing is some people will write a blog post and it's literally just like 10 paragraphs. And I find it more useful to put a section headline or a section header, an H2 basically, at the beginning of sections of your blog post. And then those shouldn't be subject lines. So one shouldn't say introduction, another shouldn't say conclusion, but instead, uh, the H2, that section headline, can prime the reader for what the main takeaway is of that section. So then when they're reading it, they've already kind of got a sense of what that main takeaway is and they're ready for it, they're looking for it. It also, most people will read those section headlines and decide what portion of this blog post am I really going to read. And so it's almost like if you're walking down a hallway and there's all these office doors and the office doors have names. Here's Elizabeth Christensen's office, right? That label, that name can tell you what's going on inside. So I don't know. It's just a great way to make things more scannable. And here I have a couple of examples of like what I thought was boring or just okay. Like having a section headline that says example is not as good as having a section headline that says a real world example, a multi-tenant to-do application. Like that's more specific. And most of the engineers I know, which includes everyone in my family and myself formerly, like we like specifics. Instead of a section headline that just says PG Bouncer, having it say how to set up PG Bouncer, which is our preferred connection pooler, might be more useful, might be more of a hook, might get someone to actually take a look at what's in there. Um, Okay. And then because people's brains process information differently, I find it useful to use a variety of formats. Like some people are really visual. A diagram is going to help them way more than 10 paragraphs. Screenshots are going to help them way more than 10 paragraphs. Code blocks are like a magnet for a lot of developers. And then tables, particularly for people who work in databases like Postgres, right? Tables can also be a great way to highlight particularly if you're doing comparisons or things like that. When I was working on this blog post regarding Postgres 15 with David Rowley a couple of years ago, we actually spent some time figuring out exactly the right way to format this chart to make the takeaways pop. And we knew we wanted to include a chart. We knew that was kind of the best way to show these comparisons between Postgres 14 and Postgres 15. But figuring out the right labels and title and ways to make it quickly readable mattered. And I think this blog post without the charts would not have been nearly as effective. If I remember correctly, it probably hit front page Hacker News and really got a lot of interest from the Postgres user community. And I think the charts helped that happen. Now, when you do things with charts or diagrams or screenshots, remember to use alt text. Super, super important for accessibility reasons for the many people out there who have visual impairments. And actually, that same thing is true with H2s, the section headlines I mentioned a minute ago. Don't just use regular text that you make bigger and bolder for those section headlines. Literally within your blogging platform, make sure those are set as H2s, because that will help the screen readers that people who are visually impaired will use as well. So accessibility is kind of always on my mind, particularly at Microsoft, where it's kind of required. The last thing I want to flag here regarding empathy is readability. How many of you, I don't know if any of you have ever tried this thing called the Hemingway app, but it can be, some people use it for everything they publish. Other people use it for a handful of times while they see, oh, I see that way that pattern that I use in my writing is labeled at the 18th grade level, and maybe I should simplify it. Maybe I should use shorter sentences, use less complicated sentence structures. But you can take your words, your paragraphs, and drop it into the Hemingway app, and it will critique it. And of course, these days, I will sometimes take things I've written and drop them into ChatGPT or Copilot and say, hey, can you make this simpler and more scannable and easier to understand while maintaining the authentic, clear tone of voice, which is meant to be helpful and developer friendly, or something like that. That'll be my prompt. And I probably only like half of what I get back, but it's like having an editor who can help you. So Hemingway app is a great critic who can point out things that you're doing that are making it hard for people to read what you're writing. And then these days, I'm also using ChatGPT to suggest some edits for me. And then the other thing ChatGPT will do as well is, in addition to the suggestions, at the end it says, these are the types of suggestions I've given you. And it categorizes all the types of improvements that have been made. And that's kind of cool too, because then I can see, oh, okay. The feedback is that my section headlines are unclear, or that my title was too long, or whatever. Okay. Oh, I guess there is another tip about empathy, which is to write in a conversational voice. So that's really, really important. And the way that I test if I've done that is I will read it out loud. And if I read it out loud and it doesn't sound like me, or it sounds really boring or academic, or just officious or annoying or whatever all those negative words are, then I think, all right, I need to fix this. I need to edit it. I need to improve so that it sounds the way I talk. And a lot of times it also means writing to the second person you will help. Because at the end of the day, whoever's reading your blog post does not care about the author, the writer. They care about themselves first and foremost. And they care about getting answers to whatever problem they have or whatever thing they're trying to learn. And for some reason, writing in second person, writing to you, will help you, the writer, make your words more conversational, but it also just hooks most readers more. It makes the language more conversational, which people tend to like. Sometimes I'll literally imagine sitting next to a best friend trying to explain this topic to them over coffee, and think, how would I explain it to them? What filler words or what explanations, what definitions would I provide first? And then I put that into the blog post. Okay, so here's the checklist on empathy. Scannability, a whole bunch of things, variety of formats, make sure it's not just paragraphs, and then that focus on readability, conversational voice, writing to second person you. And maybe this is obvious to all of you. I obviously know this stuff really well, but I find checklists super useful to make sure I haven't forgotten something. And so that's why I structured it this way, so people could screenshot it if they wanted to use it as a checklist. So then, and I'm looking at my clock, I know we started a bit late, so I think I can go at least another 5 to 7 minutes. Am I right, Elizabeth?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. So then there's the edit cycle. And in the edit cycle, I love this diagram on the right from a person who, I'm using Blue Sky a lot these days, and there's a whole bunch of Postgres people who've been moving over to Blue Sky as well. So hopefully, if you're not there yet, you will come join. But I created this talk a couple years ago. So on the right is a screenshot from Twitter, back when Some of us used to use Twitter a lot more than we do now. And I follow this wonderful writer who shares a lot of tips named David Perel. And I love this diagram that shows all the dead ends, all of the various thought trails, and kind of going back and trying something else and then going back and until you find like the right path through. Um, I have worked with people who really just want to get something done more than anything else and don't like going down dead ends, don't like going down these thought trails, realizing it's not going to work and going back. But if you want to get to a really great end product, you should just embrace that iteration. That a part of good writing is editing, is iterating. I also know I have this one friend who's just super famous and super well known, and sometimes writes blogs that are pretty crappy. They're really not good. They're not scannable. They don't have great H2s. They don't define things. They have lots of ambiguities. But guess what? They're famous and their blogs are going to perform no matter what they do. And so some people have that superpower, which is great for them. But most of us have to do the work. And so if you're willing to embrace that iteration, your blog posts are going to benefit more people. And they're, ultimately going to reach, not only going to benefit the people they reach, but they're probably going to reach more people because you're going to get the benefits of word of mouth. And friends are going to recommend it to friends. Teammates are going to recommend it to teammates. The other thing that I think everybody in the writing world will tell you is that it's totally okay for your first draft to suck. That is the dirty little secret. So if you ever see someone on your team who's a really great blogger and you think, oh, I could never do that, you really can do that. And everybody's first drafts suck, and it's totally okay for your first draft to suck. And it's okay to share it like that, right? Just tell people it's my first draft. It has lots of problems. I want you to review just this one piece and let me know what you think of it. But people who wait till it's perfect or till it's really, really good, well, it takes them a long time to get anything done and published. And it's inefficient and ineffective. The screenshot on the left, also from David Perel, is really interesting because, when you think about artists who are creating a painting, for example, they will scumble and they will sketch what they do, what they're planning to do, what they're thinking about doing first. And most people will never see those sketches, unless they become famous and then their sketches end up in, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But the sketches are just for them. It's just like that rough outline, that rough mess. Well, I could do this, I could do that. Oh, actually, hang on a second. I gave this talk about extensions at PGConf New York City and a couple other places as well, like a map of amazing extensions. But like here, I don't know if you can see this on video. Can you see it? Or is it not showing up?
I don't think
Oh,
I can see it.
no, because you can just see the slides. Okay, that's too bad.
Yeah.
But I'm just showing you what that sketch was of my diagram from the talk. All right. The third is feedback is a gift. And if you find somebody in your life on your team who's a really good reviewer, they are gold. Thank them, express gratitude, and take advantage of their abilities. There are people in your lives and your teams who probably will look at something you've written and will say, oh, it looks good to me. And really, they haven't looked at it very carefully and haven't looked at it with empathy. And they're not a good editor. So recognize that people who might edit your stuff have a variety of editing skills themselves, and not everybody's good at it. And it's not good to just hear, it looks good to me. That's probably not useful. There might actually be problems that should be fixed. So finding people who are going to see those things that you've missed and give you actionable feedback is a really useful thing to do. The other thing I will do is I will sometimes give my reviewers focus areas. Like on the left, this is a technique I sometimes use. Flag anything that is confusing. Flag anything where you get bored, where your mind starts to wander. If there's 10% that you love, 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 and you want to make sure I don't cut, tell me what that is that you want me to keep. And then if you think anything is missing, scribble it down. Just let me know. So giving people focus areas can help, and maybe not giving everybody the same focus area can also help. All right, let's see. I think I have a few more tips here. Oh, have you ever heard this quote from Stephen King's? He wrote this amazing semi-autobiographical book called On Writing, which is the best book on writing on the planet. But kill your darlings, even when it breaks your egocentric little scribbler's heart. Kill your darlings. I'm going to pause for 1 second. You guys do see the big screen, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't see the presenter view with the multiple different slides. Okay, cool.
No.
Nope.
Anyway, I think of Stephen King and that quote whenever I have to cut, because you do have to cut sometimes. Like if you don't cut, then your reader is going to cut and they're going to decide what part to read and what part not to read. So oftentimes what we write in the beginning cannot be what we publish. It's too long. It's too much. It's asking too much of the reader. So, and then this example, I use it even though it's from, gosh, 4 years ago now. From Anders Freund. He wrote a draft of a blog post that was so long that it got cut into 3 smaller blog posts. And each of those 3 smaller blog posts hit Front Page Hacker News separately. Each of those 3 smaller blog posts, which were long in and of themselves, garnered a ton of views. So sometimes taking that big long draft and not just cutting and leaving it on the floor, but splitting it into multiple blogs can be a good way to go. And then you've all heard the phrase keep it simple, stupid. But I do try to keep things simple, and I will use analogies a lot to try to help readers put whatever that concept is, that new thing that we're trying to explain, into a mental model they already know. That makes it so much faster for them to understand. I'll also try to take complicated details and put them in footnotes to pull them out of the main flow of the blog post. And then going back to that Hemingway app, try to write at the 3rd or the 5th grade level. Really short sentences, short paragraphs, making it easy to understand. And then I already mentioned earlier, reading it out loud can help you find out if your tone of voice is conversational or not. Would I really talk like that? Or does it sound snobby or condescending or whatever? But the other thing that reading it out loud can do is you can hear mistakes, right? You can hear mistakes that if you read silently in your head, your brain will fix them and you won't even realize those mistakes are there. So I will do it for those 2 reasons. And then the last thing, I'm not going to go into SEO and optimizing for SEO beyond saying that good content is paramount and the title is really, really, really important. Making sure that you have the right keywords in that title that reflect what the post is about. Remembering that Google will truncate an HTML title at 60 characters, including spaces. A lot of people have titles that are longer than that. And if the word Postgres and the important words are all after the 60th character, then that means in search results, those most important keywords are not going to show up. And which means you're not going to get as many clicks and you're not going to get as many people benefiting from all that work that you put in. So do pay attention to the title. And then I think I'm going to stop there because I know that I had to cut the talk. I could go on for another 20 minutes easily. But again, another checklist here with those editing tips on the left. And these are the SEO tips I didn't go into, except beyond to say that the title matters. When it comes to the title, let me go back for just a second. I find that the first title I come up with is usually pretty bad. And the same is true for most people that I work with. And I will just encourage people to write down 5 different titles. Keep iterating on it. And each one is slightly different than the previous, slightly different. But then in the end, one of those bad titles will be good. But the only way you're going to find it is to it's kind of like mining for gold. Just kind of keep fiddling and trying things until you get there. So when we iterate and have a couple of options, that's when we'll find titles that will work. And I think I do want to ask this question. We'll know which blog posts are good by how much traffic they get. True or false? What do you think? True? False?
It depends.
Oh,
It
yeah.
depends. I like that.
Of course, it couldn't be a database talk without hearing the classic, it depends. The reason I put this on the slide is I actually say false. Because yes, a great blog post that's well distributed, well promoted will typically get a lot of good traffic. But sometimes you can have a great blog post that doesn't get much traffic, and it's not a reflection of the usefulness of the blog post or the empathy that was used or the scannability of it, but it's really just a reflection of the fact that it wasn't shared well. It wasn't promoted well. It wasn't promoted on the right time of the seasonality can be a factor. If you publish something when there's something else big happening in the world, right, you're not going to get attention because whatever that big thing happening in the world is, that's going to take over people's mind share and airwaves. So the whole point of that question was to flag the fact that distribution can sometimes trump content. And you kind of have to care about promoting. And I know that makes a lot of us uncomfortable. It used to make me extremely uncomfortable. But I realized that if I want people to learn from this thing, I'm going to have to make sure it gets discovered and find the right recipes for finding ways to promote it. So if there is just one thing that you remember, it's going to be empathy. Because empathy will help you care about that reader and follow whatever it is the tips and the best practices are that you decide you believe in and you want to employ. And then I think all I have after this point is I'm just telling people who will listen that the CFP is open for Posette. It closes February 9th. But the CFP is also open for pgconf.dev and Nordic PG Day and PG Day Paris. And the CFP is about to open for PGConf Germany as well in a couple days. So just making sure that if anybody here wants to submit a conference talk, maybe has given a meetup talk recently and is ready to try their hand at giving a presentation at a conference, Posette is virtual, and all those other events that I just mentioned are in-person events happening next year. And then I wanted to make sure people know about the podcast. But I'm going to stop sharing here, I think.